Yeah. Yeah, make it look like look into the lighting.
You can further this way if you like, yeah.
Alrighty, it's still there. Welcome. So glad to have you guys tonight for speaker series with super special guest, Blue the Wonder Opossum, Blue the Blind Opossum. And so he's always happy to meet everybody in his fan club. But despite being nocturnal, I think he's just happy to have nap time. So always. He's going to go speak at University of Miami tomorrow with me.
Oh, so. He's a good night's sleep.
He does. He's got to put on his big thinking cap tomorrow. So tonight we're very pleased to have with us Tiffany Moore, who's going to talk to us about some of the Zoo Miami conservation land work with various native butterfly species. And so I will, without much ado, I will leave you to it. Thank you.
Perfect. So the good segue there. So a little bit about me. I am actually a transplant from North Carolina. So I went to NC State for my bachelor's degree. I got a minor, and my degree was in environmental science and my minor was in entomology, since they didn't have entomology degrees for bachelor's programs. So I did what I could to keep my interests going. And then I moved here after NC State and started working at the zoo in 2019. And fortunately, the zoo is a county-operated facility, so we actually get a great program where they will help you pay some of your tuition if you're a county employee. So with that program, I was actually able to start my master's at UF online, and I'm also a current PhD student studying interdisciplinary ecology. And most of my species that I'm working with my PhD is actually going to be these 4 species here. So we have the Bartram scrub hairstreak butterfly, Miami tiger beetle, the pine rockland trapdoor spider, and partially some of the Miami cave crayfish. So this is the butterfly bunker, as we affectionately call it. This is the lab that I work out of at the zoo. And this was a real bunker that was operated during World War II. And so when the zoo, before it was the zoo, it was actually a Navy base during World War II. And several of these bunkers are still on property. And we outfitted this one with solar panels and a rain barrel so that it could be more functional. It also provides a great buffer with temperature, so if it's really hot outside, it's usually cooler inside, and vice versa. There are challenges working inside of the space. There's no air conditioning, and so at the very back end of the bunker in the ceiling, there's actually a stack that is a small solar panel operated fan, so it pulls in that air from the front door, so it has some kind of circulation through there. We also try to use dehumidifier when we are out there, so it brings down the humidity because the humidity can get quite extensive in there. It's like its own little cave. So I wanted to do a pop quiz before we get started. As a raise of hands, I'll go through A, B, C, and D. If you could, I have the answers.
I thought this was going to be easy.
Yeah, I guess I switched it up. Sorry about that. Well, there you go. It's the easiest pop quiz you'll ever take. So A is Viceroy, which is a similar looking butterfly, but it mimics the monarch butterfly. We have the Queen, which is also a Florida native species, also uses milkweed species here, and the Gulf fritillary, which is orange but has different patterns. So these are the native milkweed species that we have. Some of them, there's a lot of them that I have a later slide to talk about. But in 2022, we actually started what we called the Milkweed Initiative. And so we were wanting to clean up the zoo in the tropical milkweed because the tropical milkweed is a non-native plant and it causes a lot of harm to the butterfly population for monarchs here. And so what we did was actually remove all of the tropical milkweed from the zoo grounds, and we started advocating for the native milkweeds instead. So here we have the butterfly milkweed, which is Asclepias tuberosa. green antelope horn, or Asclepias viridis, the swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, and then we have Asclepias curasavica, which is the tropical milkweed. So monarchs have a very special relationship with milkweeds, as we probably know, but it also has, tropical milkweed also has a relationship with the OE parasite, and as tropical milkweed persists, so does the OE parasite. And as the OE parasite thrives on a tropical milkweed, it does not thrive on a native milkweed. And the reason for that is because tropical milkweed, especially here in South Florida, it does not die back naturally the same way that native milkweeds do. The plant chemicals within tropical milkweed break the monarch diapause and entices oviposition. So what this means is that monarchs during the Great Migration, which is in the fall, monarchs are flying on the eastern side going down the coast and then making their way towards Mexico. And diapause is the term that we use that we describe monarchs when they are not producing a lot of other energy except for just putting it all into migration. So they're not eating a lot during that time or drinking nectar from that time. And so all of their storage and their energy during that caterpillar phase is stored so that they can make that migration, because it's a very long distance. And if you are aware that some people have tagged monarchs, there was someone that tagged a monarch in somewhere, maybe in Canada or northern US, that have made it to Mexico as well. And so they are flying thousands and thousands of miles, and it requires a lot of energy for them. So, and the term oviposition just means that they are laying eggs. So they will break the diapause, they will break their migration pattern, and then they will start to lay eggs on the milkweed that they encounter, and that is tropical milkweed. So it reduces the migratory success and overall fitness. And that is because of the parasite load on the milkweed. So as a caterpillar, they are continuing that parasite load inside of their body, and it creates a lot of problems with their migratory pathways. The overall fitness is just meaning that their physiology of the butterfly is not the same as it would be for monarchs that eat native milkweeds instead. And it also facilitates the parasite spread across migratory populations. And so, as I was mentioning, the monarchs are migrating from the eastern coast down towards Florida or to Mexico. Some of those monarchs are actually flying into Florida as well. And there was a really cool study recently by a company that makes very tiny radio transmitter tags. So they put these tags on the back of a monarch and they actually let them go. And they could see kind of in real time how these monarchs were actually flying towards Mexico for their migration. Some of those butterflies that were tagged actually flew to Florida. And so in the old literature, the scientists that were discovering the monarchs living in Mexico, some of the scientists back then were actually thinking that Florida was another migratory pathway, but it wasn't as strong as the one towards Mexico. And so that has a lot of implications for the monarchs that we have here. Infected caterpillars tend to live longer and spread more parasites. So it sounds like it's a good thing, right? The caterpillars are living longer, which means it has a longer lifespan, but it's actually spreading the parasites further. Monarchs don't fly as far as those unnative milkweeds. And so that's where the fitness and the physiology starts to come in as well. And so monarchs that are originating from Florida may not make it to other migratory pathways like the Caribbean or move towards Mexico because of the overall negative impact that the plant has on monarchs. Monarchs have a thinner and less elongated wings. This ties directly into their challenges for migrating towards Mexico because their body shape is a little different. It gives them a harder chance to actually make it to Mexico. And warming temperatures affect migration as well. And so this is probably a larger conversation between scientists than what the future has for monarch migration. As climate change is continuing in areas where the monarchs go to migrate, those areas could be warming, and that's an area typically where it is a little bit cooler because it's in the mountains in Mexico. And so that's where the cooler temperatures actually allows them to slow down their body regulation so that they're not spending a lot of energy while they're there. So these are two different maps that indicate tropical milkweed locations and the OE parasite locations. So on the left, you see the OE parasite locations. This is data that comes from monarchparasites.org, which is run out of the University of Georgia. So many of the samples that people had collected monarch butterflies, and you can use a piece of Scotch tape and tape the back of the abdomen a couple times and put it on a piece of paper, send that sample into the University of Georgia, and they can actually look under a microscope and see how many parasites are within that sample. So the darker the circle on the map, which means a heavier load of parasites from that location. And then the other map is the tropical milkweed locations. This comes from iNaturalist, which is a citizen science app that you can use to locate different plants and animals. So pulling up the tropical milkweed on iNaturalist, this is what you see. And then if you compare the two, they actually overlap quite extensively. And so this isn't, linked together necessarily from these two maps, but you could see that there's a comparison between the locations of tropical milkweed and the prevalence of OE parasites. In 2025, the tropical milkweed was listed as invasive by the Florida Invasive Species Council. This was an initiative that I kind of collaborated with Fairchild on. And so we brought this attention to the FISC group, and I gave a presentation. I had to prepare a lot of documents to show them that tropical milkweed has negative impacts in Florida, and displayed all of the scientific literature just to prove that that point was making that impact. And so they agreed, and they decided that they were going to list tropical milkweed as an invasive, category 2 invasive in Florida. At the same time, I was contacted by a PhD postdoc from UF, and she was asking a lot of scientists within the butterfly community to fill out a survey for tropical milkweed to see if there were any impacts for the native lands and such. And so the UF IFAS team also reassessed the tropical milkweed species and also labeled it as invasive. The map here also shows the suitability for tropical milkweed. And so as climate is warming, you see that tropical milkweed has a higher chance of surviving the further north in the map. And so because Miami in South Florida is very hot, it's very tropical, this is why tropical milkweed doesn't die back naturally, and it could cause an issue into the future as we see climate warming up as well. So I want to point out that these are a lot of native species of milkweed in Florida, and some of them are really hard to acquire. They are almost threatened or endangered themselves, and some of them are not commercially available. But this is a very big list that I just like to point out that there are a lot of other options that we could try to navigate to instead of using tropical milkweed. And then I'd like to make a transition here. So there are a lot of people that want to be a part of the butterfly community and have a positive impact for raising butterflies and planting gardens for them. However, monarchs are probably not the best one to do that for because of all of the negative impacts that they have. So for monarchs specifically, there's a better positive impact with a no-hands approach. So these are a lot of other butterfly species in Florida that have a much more imperiled listing status than the monarchs do. I will also say that monarchs were proposed to be listed in December 2024 for Fish and Wildlife to list it as endangered or threatened. They're still going through that process of the public comment period and then making that final decision, which has not come out yet. But there are all of these other species here in South Florida that have a lot more challenges than monarchs do.
And so the ones that I work with are the Bartram scrub hair streak butterfly. And I've also done some Schaus surveys and Miami blue surveys in the Florida Keys. The Florida dusky wing is another species that is proposed to be listed maybe in the future because the populations of them are what they think is not very strong here. So this is the first species that I worked with at the zoo. This is the faithful beauty moth. It's a diurnal moth, which just means that it flies during the day. And this species had not been documented again since the 1800s. And so people knew what the species was, but a lot of the life history information was not documented in the modern era. And so what we did is that I had permits to collect the species here in around the zoo, and then we raised them in the butterfly bunker. I measured the caterpillars as they grew up, and then I documented any behavioral things that I saw and different things that I saw in the field as well while I was walking around the pine rockland. And so we were actually able to document 4 new host plant species for the caterpillar. And then we documented that there's a variant number of the larval stages. So larval is just the caterpillar term for scientific literature. And in the bottom, what you see the A and B photo. And so those are the head capsules of the caterpillar. So as a caterpillar grows, it molts when it reaches that next stage. And so it will molt, shed its skin, shed the head capsule, which is just like the covering of its face, and then it gets to grow even larger. So some of the caterpillars went through 6 phases, some of them went through 5 phases. While we don't know exactly why this could be, it could be theorized that they may not want to all come out as adults at the exact same time. You don't want to mate with your brothers and sisters, so that's probably a thing that why there's a difference there. Also for predatory reasons, we don't want lizards or birds or anything else to eat them if they come out all at the same time. So this species, we documented a 41-day life cycle, and then with the amount of moths and eggs that I took in from the wild, it was about 140 or so. And then we released 394 back into the wild. This is the second species that I worked with. And essentially it was the same exact methods. It was just a different species. So this is the lesser wasp moth. It's also diurnal, so it flies during the day. And we observed this species utilizing a new host plant that we had not known before in the literature as well. And so this species uses a crossopetalum species, which is just the genus of the plant name. So it's maidenberry and quailberry. And so we also confirmed that the variants of the caterpillar phases also varied here. So we had 6, 7, or 8 phases of the caterpillar. And so the head capsules are there in the photo. This species also has 61-day life cycle, so it had a longer lifespan than the faithful beauty did. And then with this species, I took in 44 eggs, I believe, and then we released 136 species or individuals back into the wild. We'll get your question after.
Sounds good.
So this is another species that I started working with last year. The host plant is locust berry or Barbados cherry, but they probably have a preference for locust berry. The Florida dusky wing is slated or in conversations to be proposed to be listed in the few years coming. Some of my colleagues at UF had done some research, genetic research with them, and found that the samples that they were varying from around the zoo to different county parks, and I think also in the Keys, show that the genetics are the same, which means that if need be, that we could take this species into a lab and raise them in a lab, and if the population declines in the wild, that we could release them and that genetic population would still be the same. And so during surveys for this species, there was someone that was doing butterfly surveys, counting the number of individuals. And what they were actually finding is that during those previous surveys, there was a misrepresentation of the population numbers. So this species also gets confused with another one called the Horse's dusky wing. And the only difference between the two is that the horse's dusky wing has 4 white spots on the wing, and the dusky wing has 3. And it's really hard to tell the difference. So up towards like the top of the wing, it's small, like 3 little white dots next to each other, and that's the real difference that you can tell. The other difference is that a Florida dusky wing is going to hang out around a locust berry plant, and a horse's dusky wing uses oak species, oak trees. Okay, so another little shift here. This is a study that we did, and it's going to be one of my PhD chapters. And so a couple years ago, we had the opportunity of hosting an REU at the zoo. An REU is a research experience for undergraduate students. So students who were doing their bachelor's or at community colleges, they could sign up to do a program across the world, and we were the first zoo to host it. And so I got a student from Maine, and I wanted her to do some surveys for the Bartram's butterfly. We chose 6 different units of the pine rockland around the zoo that had a difference in management style. And so whether it was a more quote unquote pristine unit, meaning that it gets more management, it has less pines and less palms and more frequent prescribed fires, versus units that have not been touched or managed for 20 years. So there was a variance in the number of unit or the types of units that we were choosing, just to see if we had a control for what the species was going to look like in those more dense units. So I had Kenny, my student, characterize the habitat. What was the open canopy of the pine trees looking like? How many palm trees were around in a singular point? How many pineland croton plants were around in that area? How sandy is the ground, and so forth. And so what she actually found in the entire summer was that there were only 14 eggs that she found and 2 caterpillars. And that was pretty vast because we were expecting a lot more. And what we did was we took that information. I had my student present to my colleagues at UF, and I think it lit the fire for them. My PhD advisor, Dr. Jarrett Daniels, and my colleague, he was working with Fish and Wildlife Service, started to have conversations with them to make them understand that we don't want the Bartrams to have the same story as the Schaus swallowtail, where those populations were dipping down a few years, where one year when they did surveys, they only found 4 adults. We don't want that same fate for the Bartrams. And so he was trying to light the fire for them and make them understand that this is more dire, that we need more surveys, we need more funding, we need to do something about this species. So that is what led me to doing more surveys at the Pine Rockland around the zoo and at the Coast Guard site. And so our property at Zoo Miami, we have a lot of neighbors. So to the west side, we have Martinez Pineland, and just south, we have Larry and Penny Thompson Park. Those are both county-owned properties. We also have a federal prison, a Department of Defense site, a Coast Guard site, and University of Miami's C-STARS is an acronym. I don't know what it stands for. But University of Miami also owns a fragment of the Pine Rockland there. So all of us together make up the Richmond Tract Pine Rockland. And so when we continue to do surveys, I partnered with Fairchild to do the surveys, and we chose 2 units at the zoo and 2 units at the Coast Guard site. And luckily, we had a prescribed fire at one of the units in the zoo, and we had a wildfire actually take hold at the Coast Guard site. And so that allowed us to monitor what the butterfly population was going to look like after those events. So at the Coast Guard site, during the entire year of surveying, we surveyed bi-monthly. So twice a month, we would do surveys in those 4 units. At the Coast Guard site, there were, in total, I believe there were the 544 pineland croton plants. And when we were doing the transect surveys, we only surveyed the plants that are kind of within our immediate reach, just a few feet from us. And so in total, we surveyed 482 plants, but there were 544 that we encountered during the survey. And so at the Coast Guard site, we observed 51 Bartram's observations. And so that includes the eggs, the caterpillars, and adults. And then the same thing for the zoo. There was 430 plants that we actually searched versus the 500 that we encountered. And we only found 22 Bartram's observations. So this also left me with a question. The Coast Guard site had not had any management on their pine rockland for a very long time. They were just starting to have conversations with Fish and Wildlife and other county officials to get management on the ground. And we were then left with questioning, why is it that we found more Bartrams at the Coast Guard site than we did at the zoo site? And so I'm continuing to ask those questions and see what we can pull from our data and answer some of those questions, but we may not know the answer. It could be a management style difference. The wildfire was very hot, and so when you have a hot, intense fire, it changes the plant community differently than it would be a low intensity fire. And so we're just trying to calculate what that actually means. So these are some of the caterpillars and eggs that we encountered. So they are very, very small and very cryptic. So in the red arrows, you actually see an egg, and the blue arrows, you actually see a caterpillar. And these, this species usually likes to lay eggs at the terminal end of the plant, which is just where the flower buds are producing, or like the new leaves are producing. And they are very small, but when you know what signs to look for the species eating the vegetation, you could see that this pineland croton plant actually bleeds. And so the plant juices it will look like an orange color if you tear the leaf, but once it dries up, it's a little bit darker. And so you can see those vegetation indicators when a caterpillar is consuming that plant. And it also helps us identify if there was something there. In the third photo, this one here, you see that this egg is a little bit darker. That's actually a parasitized egg. And so the caterpillar inside of the egg will not be dark like this unless it is parasitized. And so that's another data point that we were considering for the population. So this is some previous work, as I mentioned earlier, that I had done some surveys for Shelf Swallowtail and for the Miami blue butterfly. They had asked, Fish and Wildlife had asked volunteers to do butterfly surveys in the Florida Keys for Shelf Swallowtail. I believe that they're doing another volunteer sign up soon in April here. And so if you attend the presentation and you get to meet other people doing surveys, then you can be listed on the permit to actually go out and do surveys for the Shelf Swallowtail. So this population is actually doing really well. My PhD advisor, Dr. Jarrett Daniels, works with this species at UF. He has a colony of them, and he's able to do a lot of releases with them. So I've gone out and I've helped release caterpillars, but he's also released pupa, or the cocoon phase, and they use glue to glue them to popsicle sticks sometimes, and they will put the stick out into the wild so that once they come out as an adult, they are already out there in the field. And then I also partnered with Fairchild to do a lot of the Miami blue work. And so a few years ago, my colleague Lydia, at the time when she was with Fairchild, we did a lot of plant surveys around South Florida, even on the West Coast towards Tampa, to identify different sites of where we could maybe release Miami blue butterflies so that they have a range outside of the Florida Keys. Just in case, you never know, like Florida Keys are probably sinking. And so a lot of salt intrusion with their plants are being impacted as well. It's a very, very small butterfly, and so they can't fly very far actually. So everything that they need as a caterpillar and an adult butterfly, they need in very close proximity. So when we were doing surveys for Miami Blue, we were also considering all of the flowering plants nearby and writing down the plant name and having a list. And so what we had done was we chose a site somewhere up north, and I think we put out one initial batch of Miami Blue butterflies, but we continued to do surveys for a year, and we could not tell that there were any take to that population there. They are also strikingly similar to two other butterfly species that we have in South Florida. It's the Cassius blue and the Serranus blue. And because they look strikingly similar, both of those other butterflies, even though they're common, are protected as well, because the people may not understand the differences in the patterns on their wings. And it also makes it very difficult because as we are surveying for the Miami Blue, their eggs and caterpillars also look the same as those other two butterfly species. And so you don't actually know that you have a Miami Blue until you have it as an adult, which made it very difficult. But those are the two federally endangered species that we worked with in the Keys in South Florida. But they, I think UF is like taking control of their research with them going forward as well. So here is a butterfly planting guide that we made at the zoo. This is all native species to South Florida, and I made sure to double check all of the plants here just to see if they are commercially available. So we do have host plants and nectar plants. So the host plant is just going to be what the caterpillar eats, and the nectar plant is what the adult butterfly is going to eat. And so we do have this on the zoo website. I also have a QR code in a couple of slides if you want to download it straight. But if that's not working, I also have my email here, and you could email me if you want a copy of it.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I have one more QR code for anybody that is wanting to read a lot more on tropical milkweed in Florida. I have a written document that explains a lot more, but it's more scientific. So I have a lot of references in the back end. I printed a couple copies in the back, but if you want a PDF version, I could send that as well.
Thank you so much. Yep. Yeah.
Would you be able to go back to the faithful beauty moth slide? Show the larval stages. So my question is, like, between A and B, you know how there's 5 stages, and B 6 and 8. What is the time difference between when like A would hatch?
It's not much of a time difference. It's I don't recall in the data itself, but it was not extravagant. It was just maybe less than a week or so, if I remember right.
Okay.
And you'll see like number 3 here is the same,
Mhm.
and then it starts to change here.
Yeah.
And so it's just very slight difference, but it's not in the time. It's not very dramatic.
Yeah, no, just curious because you were talking about like how one of the reasons could be to dodge a predator, for example.
Mhm.
And I was just thinking like, okay, well, how many days does it take? Like, is it they're hatching 2 hours apart when the predator is going?
Yeah, it's a
or
little
is
bit
it
more than 2
days?
hours. Yeah.
Thanks.
How small, I mean, that's not the size, the A&B of the actual things, are they?
No, they are very small. So the first little one right here is probably like 1 millimeter or so.
Part of the pin.
Yeah, it's very small. I actually use a microscope to do this. So I had the microscope and I put them all there in a line. And on the microscope, there's a software that you can have a camera on it. And so I just took a photo from the microscope itself. And I was also able to measure them. So in my published paper, I have the actual measurements.
So, I mean, how do you see those when you're doing a field survey?
That's a good question. It's very hard. So my boss also made the same question because if I went on vacation, he would have to take care of the caterpillars for me. And so I have each caterpillar in an individual cup. That way I can tell like this is the same individual that I'm measuring every day. And in the cup, I have plant material in there with a little water tube so that the plant has some type of water to last for a few days. But every day that I would go and change out the plant material or look at everything, I would take all of the stuff out. I would look inside of the cup. Caterpillars poop just like us. And so it sometimes blends in and it could be kind of hard, but I would shift the cup around in the light, maybe use my phone flashlight to look at the inside of the cup. And if I saw something shiny, then I knew it was probably this type capsule because if a caterpillar freshly poops, it is very soft, it's moist, it has a different color than it would as it hardens and dries out. And so I'm looking for all of those factors too when I'm like looking at the cup.
Well, how big is the moth?
So the moth itself with the wings open is probably like this.
Yes, it's like, yeah, I mean,
It's not the biggest moth. We have bigger moths, but it is pretty big.
So, yeah, just, mine isn't so much a question, but back when, 6 years ago, we started to have COVID and because we were home, we pulled out a lot of our grass in the front and made a very large butterfly garden, which has flourished with all kinds of butterflies. But we did buy milkweed, tropical milkweed. We bought other milkweeds too. We bought the swamp milkweed. It didn't make it.
Mm-hmm.
So that one, but it has, it reseeds itself. I don't even have to plant it.
Mhm.
It pops up all over. But we do have the monarchs that are there, and they seem to be doing okay. Because initially, of course, what happens? You plant it, you get too many, and then was always out trying to, if anybody's done this, always trying to find more milkweed, and we're on the phone with everybody who has milkweed. And then we started taking giant milkweed, and that's not mentioned there.
Right.
And giant, I would go out looking for giant because it would last so long.
Yeah.
Are there any problems with them feeding on the giant?
So
using that?
it's a great question. So giant milkweed is also a non-native species to Florida. It also does not die back. But there has not been enough scientific literature on giants the same way that it is with tropical milkweed. I could guess that it has the same effect as tropical milkweed because it doesn't die back. It probably harbors the OE parasite as well because of that. It gets giant, that's in the name. But
they get huge.
yeah, I've seen them like very
Yes.
big, but it probably has the same effect. I just don't know because there's not a lot of information in the literature for it.
And the last thing I will say is that when I was doing research, because of the, I didn't want to spread the disease, and I understand everything that you're saying, but I did read too that there are some that have stayed, and they just stay in South Florida that never were going to Mexico or to, and so, and it seemed to be someplace in South Florida.
Mhm.
If you're up, by Tampa, they were heading across that way. So is it possible that the ones that we have here are just a native? In other words, they're non-migratory, like some of our birds who have stopped to migrate
Yeah.
because they have everything they need here. They don't have to worry about not having milkweed someplace else.
Yeah, that's a good point. In the paper that I have back there, I do make a reference to a songbird that lost its migration the same way. This also ties in with the climate change. If Mexico, in the place where they are migrating to, gets warmer, when they do monarch butterfly counts to do census counts, in the eastern population, they count by hectares because it's a vast property in Mexico. In California, they actually count individuals. So in 2026, they just released the numbers, and I think it was 2.92 hectares of the eastern population, and then just over 12,000 individuals in Southern California is where those western monarchs migrate to. In Florida, we have a mix. So it's difficult to say what came first.
Right.
In the older literature that I've read, we didn't have resident monarchs based on what they were writing about back then. And so I think with the prevalence of butterfly gardening, and the passion for that, and then very well-intentioned people planting the wrong milkweed. I think we've kind of created our own problem, but it also goes hand in hand with, well, if they're not migrating to Mexico and they're still living here, then their population is not really declining. It's just the migratory phenomenon is declining. But we also have butterflies that are migrating towards the Caribbean. So there are some research papers that show a term called stable isotope. And so they basically look at the DNA of the bug, and they determine what milkweed species that the caterpillar phase actually ate. And so it's really cool research where they had done some research in the Caribbean with these monarchs and found that they were actually eating milkweed species that were north of Florida. And so that indicated that they were actually flying through Florida into the Caribbean to have a migratory pathway as well. And so I would want to push monarchs towards that migratory pathway instead of having them residents, because if they are residents, they are probably spreading the OE parasite more than they would be naturally. Our native milkweeds pop up at different times during the year, and so they would typically feed on like a swamp milkweed or different milkweed in the Everglades before going out. But it's kind of like, is the chicken before the egg theory? Like, we don't really know for sure. There's so many literature published on monarchs and especially tropical milkweed. But I will say that in doing a lot of research for monarchs and reading the literature, there's actually not a lot in Florida. And so what is striking is that same sentiment comes up a lot. Well, they're just residents in Florida. But because these researchers everywhere else in the US are not looking at Miami and they're not looking at tropical milkweed and the possible resident monarchs we have, they're missing a lot of the data that they could be getting and understanding from the population here. So I will say that there's not enough research on the resident monarchs here.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's on those maps that we could show, like there are some that are just here and they don't go anywhere else. They just stay.
Yeah.
You know, but
I'm blanking on the company name, but the little radio transmitter the little radio transmitter that they put on monarchs. I forget the company name, but if you Google that, it will come up. There's an app for that company, and so you could actually, it uses Bluetooth to track the monarchs. And so if you have the app and you're out there surveying, you could actually be pinging a monarch butterfly and see where, like, how close it is to you. I downloaded the app, and then I could see on the map of other people where that butterfly was actually located in the moment. So it was really cool to see, but there's definitely more research coming from technology like that.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Perhaps I was misunderstanding earlier, but is it that the explosion of monarch populations in Florida, or them deciding not to migrate and staying here, ends up passing these diseases to other flies, like native butterflies?
So there has not been a ton of research on that as well, but there have been limited research, I think, on queen butterflies, since they use milkweeds as well. And I think they can get OE parasites, but it's not the same for monarchs. It doesn't impact them the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's possible that other butterflies could have them. We just don't know enough about them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask a really dumb question?
Yes?
What's the difference between a moth and a butterfly? Are they the same thing?
No.
Oh, okay.
That's a really good question. So, so this species and the lesser wasp moth are outliers because they fly during the day. But typically, the difference is that a moth flies at night and a butterfly flies during the day. Butterflies tend to fold their wings back whenever they land on a plant, and moths tend to leave their wings out. This species kind of like triangulates them backward like that. So there's always those outliers. Another difference is their antennae. And so this is a male moth. His antennae are like, if you take a bird feather and you stick them to your head, that's what it looks like. And then the female antennae are just a little bit thinner. Butterfly antennae, we can go back to the butterfly photos here. Maybe this one in the Viceroy one. You see it's more straight. Usually at the end of the antennae, you have like a bulb. And so there's a couple different shapes for butterflies, but most of the difference are with the antennae are like the feather-like ones and the more straight ones like this.
We're so impressed with you. You have so much information and
Yeah,
it was a great presentation. It was a great presentation.
we're continuing to learn every day. I mean, this spider here, I'm learning more and more about. I have an FIU intern who's actually a technology student. So she's developing an AI code for me so that I can use my game camera footage and then track the behaviors of the spider. And so this spider was actually just documented for the in the scientific literature for the first time in 2023. So there is nothing that we know of about this spider, and so everything that we learn from this spider is going to be new to us. So it's incredibly fascinating, and I really like this species. They're very charismatic. They're not very big. They're about this big of a trapdoor spider. They
He has
do.
a big body.
Yes. Yeah. They don't like it when I do surveys and I open their little burrow door. Some of them will come up and they'll like stick their fangs into the door and close it shut. Like, no one's home. And Miami tiger beetle is another federally listed species that I get the pleasure to work with. They are only found in certain locations, 2 locations really. And so it was actually a really cool history with them where they were actually observed for the first time in what is now Barry University. And the researcher that found it documented it and then forgot about it, and they thought that it went extinct. And so it actually was not found again until 2007.
Which, and that's this one here?
The beetle.
The beetle, that's right,
Yeah.
I see here. Because that was a pylon too.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was all pineland from Barry University all the way down towards Everglades, and
Exactly.
it was all developed.
They call it the piney woods.
Yeah. So there's only 2 locations of where this beetle exists now. And in my master's, I did my thesis. It's not a formal thesis because I was an online student, but I did a project for 2 years where I tracked the larva of the beetle. And the larva of tiger beetles live underground. And so they primarily feed on ants that crawl by, but they sit with their eyes right here at the surface. And as an ant crawls by, they just reach out and grab it. And so I studied the larva for 2 years, documented it. I was able to document a female laying an egg into the sand. And then I put a tag next to where she laid the egg, and I was able to identify the time that it took that egg to hatch, which was not known before. I also observed there's another common tiger beetle species called the punctulata tiger beetle, or the punctured tiger beetle. It's twice the size as this tiger beetle. It's also very common. It lives from Florida to Arizona. And it lives in the same space as the Miami tiger beetle here. And the larvae also look the same. So it's really hard to tell the difference between the 2 species in the field. But I had a tagged burrow of the punctured tiger beetle, and I went to do a survey, and I found a Miami tiger beetle adult walking around, and the punctured tiger beetle had captured it. And so it was trying to consume the adult Miami tiger beetle, which we knew that they occupied the same space, but we didn't know if they were going to be predators to each other. And so that was something I documented for the first time as well.
That spider, where's that spider at?
The zoo.
Only
So far, that's the only place we know.
in the outside?
In the Pine Rockland at the zoo, yeah.
Wow. I live by here. I'm a mile away from the zoo.
So what's cool about trapdoor spiders like this is that the male spiders leave during the summer to go find a mate, and so they will get to sexual maturity, leave the burrow, and then go to find a female spider, and then they will probably perish after that. So they store up all of their energy just for that, and we were able to see them sometimes like crawling out during the summer. So there have been a couple of observations of them. We actually had a guy work at the zoo, had experience with trapdoor spiders, kind of knew what to look for. He actually found the first location of them in the Pine Rockland. And from there, we were on our hands and knees looking on the ground, moving the pine needles, and we found about 40 burrows. And so what we have plans in the future is to have a conservation dog, that we could have a spider, train the dog on that live spider, and then let the dog go into the Pine Rockland and see where else that they are living. And so that is also another PhD chapter of mine, is to do the game camera footage with AI detection for the behavior models. But management of the Pine Rockland for this species is also a big concern for me. High intensity fires could wipe out an entire neighborhood of these guys. And so if they're living on the forest floor and there's a fire, the door to their burrow is probably burned off in the fire. They're vulnerable to predation after that if they don't die within the fire. And so I've tried to read a lot more literature and just learn more about the spider to see if maybe we could do patch burns instead, or low intensity burn, so that we're not harming the little guys in the forest. Normally, we do forest management for bigger animals like panthers or gopher tortoises and bigger animals, but the little guys always get forgotten. So that's why I'm here.
So another question about that spider that scared me. Is that the same spider that was in the Keys in the 80s? Because I remember going like an adult, like 18, 19, going to the Keys. Some of those spiders would come after you. Like they would come out of the ground and would chase you.
Those are
Mind you, there wasn't that many houses. They were all like, it was barely in homes out there. So I remember, hanging out in the Keys.
Yeah.
18, 19, 20. There was a bunch of spiders that lived, and I thought they were tarantulas. Well, I got like,
they're probably
I would see them.
they're probably wolf spiders. So wolf spiders are quite big, and they live in burrows the same way, like underground. But wolf spiders don't have the little door.
I don't remember that. I was running away from screaming. So, but they would chase you.
Yeah.
I remember that. They would chase you.
Yeah, if you go out with a flashlight at night, you could see their eyes reflecting in the grass.
But I don't see them anymore. Because I still go to the Keys. I
Yeah.
still go to the Keys a lot, and I don't see them.
I don't know about the Keys, but they are certainly everywhere at the zoo. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for letting me talk. I hope you learned something.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I say the same thing.